In Nun Massacre, we learn about the horrendous ways Janie was tormented in a boarding school, which led to a tragedy. Mrs. McDonald, the concerned mother of Janie, goes to search for her in the boarding school, which is then revealed in a surreal manner to be abandoned and inhabited by a murderous paranormal nun. Hi folks, I'm R, your narrator. You can follow me on Twitter and send me game suggestions such as this one. You could also consider becoming a member to support the channel if you enjoy the content. This video will contain spoilers. With that in mind, let's begin. I have made a video going over the story of Nun Massacre in depth, which you can watch by hitting the card above. In this video, I will only focus on the endings of the game and what they can be interpreted as. I won't go over the same information anymore. At most, I will hint towards them, therefore, I highly suggest you watch the previous video to understand this video better. Mrs. McDonald, after coming to her senses that she was the one who caused the death of her daughter Janie, prepares a grave for herself as seen by the soil pushed aside, suggesting that it was recently dug, and proceeds to lay inside the coffin and close its cover, burying herself alive. Mrs. McDonald was a particularly religious mother with a daughter who had her doubts about the existence of God. This led Mrs. McDonald to correct Janie's mindset with the only way she knew how, to show her the definition of fear. She hence enrolls Janie in a strict correctional camp, thought to be specializing in these matters. Mother Apollonia, a sadistic nun, torments Janie physically and mentally, for the aforesaid reasons, to show her God by putting fear in her heart. This only backfires as Janie becomes broken and eventually ends her own life. This causes Mrs. McDonald to go insane and become overwhelmed with delusions from the immense guilt she feels. She subsequently goes to the abandoned correctional camp to end her own life, as she cannot bear the truth that she was the culprit behind her innocent daughter's death. Mrs. McDonald traverses across vents throughout her exploration in the boarding school. In one of the vents, as she continues forward, after some time the vent deforms into a tighter and smaller place where her ears start ringing, a representation of when a person is about to become unconscious as the blood pressure drops and the heart rate decreases. This portrays how Mrs. McDonald is in fact about to lose her consciousness and even possibly die. As she reaches a certain point in the vent, with her being unable to move any further, the ringing becomes extremely loud, and after a short while, a child figure made of light quickly approaches Mrs. McDonald and ends her life. This small figure made of light might be the embodiment of Janie, who died due to the horrible treatment she was receiving. Despite Mrs. McDonald's beliefs that Janie was doomed to suffer in hell as she didn't believe in God, she observes how her daughter in fact became an angelic presence after her death, showing how wrong Mrs. McDonald was. This, however, can be interpreted to be another delusion of Mrs. McDonald, and how she sees her daughter, an angel that died in a young age, someone who deserved much better. Mrs. McDonald, consumed by self-guilt, sees how the representation of her daughter, seen as this figure of light, takes her life rightfully, as Mrs. McDonald deserved to die as a consequence, or at least in her own eyes. Mrs. McDonald realizes how she mistreated her daughter and how she deserved to suffer and die, especially in the hands of Janie, to seek her own justice. The answer to how Mrs. McDonald actually died here could be interpreted differently. In theory, she might have died due to severe terrifying delusions leading to cardiovascular complications. Maybe the fear she so desperately wanted to show to her daughter ironically was witnessed by herself, which led to her losing consciousness and eventually dying, being trapped inside a vent. Mrs. McDonald becomes trapped in this ending, with the eyeless nun finding her and vomiting blood on her, which some have interpreted to be acidic. This makes Mrs. McDonald to scream in agony and slowly die. Yet again, the blood vomit might be the representation of sins Mrs. McDonald committed in her own eyes, weighing down on her and causing her death. Mrs. McDonald believed in punishment for sins and suffering. Hence, it's rightful in her own subconscious that she should suffer for the sins she had committed. This death causes severe pain on Mrs. McDonald, who eventually dies, something that she truly deserved. Yet again, the actual death can be debated, going back to the interpretation that Mrs. McDonald died due to low blood pressure and decreased heart rate. However, another theory which changes the entire story is that Mrs. McDonald in fact is trapped within a purgatory, repeatedly suffering the consequences of her sin. Keep this in mind, as we'll get back to it in another ending. Yet another painful ending is of Mrs. McDonald falling into the barbed wire pit and getting trapped. While her flesh and skin is being torn and scratched by the sharp ends of the wires, already painful and agonizing, the nun reaches Mrs. McDonald, who observes her for a while, then delivers the swift punishment that is just and rightful in Mrs. McDonald's mind, no matter how painful. After traversing across some reality-bending vents pathways, Mrs. McDonald gets teleported to a room where the nun is trapped inside a cage, having a much smaller and shorter figure, resembling a child's body. Bungo the Clown doll is also in this room, hanging on the ceiling, dangling around. The nun produces child noises and seems scared. However, Mrs. McDonald picks up a can of gasoline and sets her on fire. She screeches loudly in pain, terrifying Mrs. McDonald. She soon burns into a skeleton, and the screams come to a stop. Mrs. McDonald then speaks to Bungo the Clown, who tells Mrs. McDonald that she's forgiven in a distorted voice. Then a tight passageway appears in the room of a stairwell leading up to a bright white space, representing heaven. Getting back to the theory that Mrs. McDonald is trapped in a purgatory makes a lot of sense here. All of this might be due to the delusions of Mrs. McDonald, but at the same time, in here she has positive visions, where she goes to a presumable heaven, with her overpowering the killer nun. As I mentioned in the previous video, the nun is the representation of Janie's grudgeful soul and the self-guilt of Mrs. McDonald. When Mrs. McDonald burns the nun, in fact, she destroys her own self-guilt, which became her tormentor and executioner. In other words, she moves on from the idea of torturing herself for the passing of Janie. Even though she deserved to suffer and was the direct culprit of her suffering, it seems as if Mrs. McDonald has been stuck in this never-ending loop of a purgatory for some time, going into the boarding school, always looking for her sick daughter, just to be reminded that she was the one who sent her here to suffer. This eventually leads to her death in gruesome ways after being relentlessly chased by the terrifying eyeless nun. It's possible that Mrs. McDonald in fact suffered in this purgatory for many years, with her finally getting a chance of redemption. That chance appears to only have become available from Mrs. McDonald's daughter, Janie. Mrs. McDonald talks to Bungo the Clown, who Janie mentions to have been the only friend she had. Therefore, it's likely that Janie spoke through the doll, or Bungo repeated Janie's words that Mrs. McDonald is forgiven. This puts an end to the never-ending looping torment of Mrs. McDonald, who becomes forgiven by Janie, as after all, Janie was a pure soul and cared about her mother, which eventually leads to a passageway to heaven appearing for Mrs. McDonald to get out of this purgatory. That's it for today's video, folks. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to stay tuned by hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell. You can also follow me on Twitter, where you can send me game suggestions. It's been your host Star. Till the next video, have a fantastic day.